大家好，歡迎嚟收看我哋另一集節目 Hat Historian. In this video, I will be talking about a hat that was once a common attribute of the East Asian farmer and has become something of a stereotypical element for representation of Chinese people and their neighbors in general, the Asian Conical Hat. A round straw hat, usually with a pointed shape, though it can vary slightly. It goes by different names such as the paddy hat, rice hat, bamboo hat, sedge hat, or in Asia, depending on the country, and you'll have to forgive my pronunciation, the nonla, duli, kasa, doun, kup, satgat, and many other names. Made of plant fibers like palm leaf, bamboo, or straw, it is usually formed of an outer shell over a structure that fits the head, allowing air to circulate between it and the skull, and is held bound by a ribbon or cord. Worn primarily by rural folk as protection against the sun and rain, its distinctive shape has come to be recognized throughout the world and associated with East Asia. So let us take a closer look. While often stereotypically associated in Western countries with China, and indeed my own intro to this video was in Cantonese Chinese, and the hat that I'm wearing says China somewhere on it because that's where it comes from, the classic round cone-shaped hat that comes to mind is originally from Vietnam. Known there as the non la, or leaf hat, it has become something of a national symbol of the nation. Other countries have their own similar hats, but the non la is the one that is perfectly circular with flat sides coming to a point. Its precise origins, like so many peasant hats, are lost to history. There is a legend in Vietnam that says that thousands of years ago, when torrential rain would swamp the countryside, a giant woman descended from the sky, wearing a large hat made of palm leaves held by bamboo, so large it would shield the farmers from the rain, and with which she could fan the clouds away and guarantee good weather. She then taught the farmers how to farm rice, saving them from starvation, before returning to the sky. To honor her, the farmers started wearing hats similar to hers, thus creating the non la. While a lovely legend, the origins of this hat are probably more similar to those of the salakot of the Philippines, which, as I've mentioned in its video, would eventually give us the pith helmet. It was a cheap way to ensure a cool head, shielded from the sun, and the large leaved U's would render it fairly waterproof, while the cord would keep it on the head in windy weather. It was simply a practical peasant hat. While depictions of this kind of hat can be found as far back as 3000 BC, the more structured regular non-la was said to have appeared in the 16th century during the Tran dynasty. Due to its practical nature, it spread over the years to neighboring countries such as Cambodia and Laos, where it kept a similar shape, to Malaysia and Thailand, to southern China, which had a very similar climate to Vietnam. While it eventually spread through other classes in Vietnam, in China it tended to be only worn by the farmers, as higher classes wore cloth caps such as the Mandarin hat. Whether influenced by them or through parallel invention, the Koreans and Japanese also had straw hats mounted on frames, though despite some depictions in Western media, these hats usually look very different from the conical hat, being usually either flatter or more dome-shaped. Similarly, in China, a bell-shaped hat was more prevalent in many regions than the one stereotypically pictured. In China, a smaller, lightly curved form of the hat did eventually move from rural circles into the summer dress of some Qing dynasty officials, and in the 19th century reinforced versions were even used by the Chinese army, as it fought off European colonial ambitions. It is during that time that those colonial ambitions brought the conical hat to the attention of Europeans, and then the wider world, particularly through two countries, Britain and France. Britain, which had possessions in Hong Kong, equipped some of its native police and security forces with pointed helmets, reminiscent of the Du Li, and images of these were brought back to London. But it was particularly the French presence in Indochina, modern-day Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, that popularized the image of the non la. One of the ways it was seen, while rarely in person by Europeans, was through the tirailleurs Indochinois, native troops recruited from Southeast Asia, whose headgear were pith helmets shaped to resemble their native conical hats. While it was mostly relegated as a parade item by World War I, Indo-Chinese troops deployed in France during this conflict would have been seen by local French inhabitants and soldiers, as well as British, Anzac, and American allies, and the occasional German prisoner, who might not have made this fine distinction between Indo-Chinese and Chinese, and therefore associated the hat with Asians in general. This image would have been reinforced by postcards and posters depicting these men in their uniform as a propaganda piece. The association of the conical hat, particularly the non la, with Asian people in Western media was truly cemented by another conflict involving the Vietnamese, but this time in their home country, the Vietnam War. American troops, many of whom were in Asia for the first time, were constantly interacting with poor rural inhabitants, who more often than not would wear the traditional hat. Furthermore, it had a somewhat sinister association as being also the hat worn by many Viet Cong, mostly because they were poor farmers originally too, and it was their original hat, but also because it allowed them to blend into the population. American soldiers would have been struck by this very distinctive hat, and when they returned home, an entire generation associated Asians in general with the only Asian population many would interact with, the Vietnamese and their non la. While, like many traditional hats, it might not be worn as much as it once was, particularly in Vietnam, where a more urban population has switched to more international fashions, it is still found in its area of origin, rural regions. There, workers, including many women, who work in the rice paddies, wear it for the same reasons they always have, because it's practical against the sun and rain that are prevalent in those regions. It can also be found occasionally on street workers who are outside all day in urban zones. As an item of ceremonial wear, the classic non la is considered part of the national costume of Vietnam, cherished and worn for special occasions. Women will wear it with the áo đai, the traditional dress. In other countries, highly decorated versions are found in celebrations or religious ceremonies. It is also a very popular tourist souvenir in many Asian countries, even slightly outside its zone of traditional presence, with versions going from cheap and simple to highly ornate being found in markets, shops, and touristy areas throughout Eastern Asia. As a cultural symbol, it can be found in representations meant to evoke Asian people or characters, either traditional or futuristic, as its distinctive shape is easily recognizable. These depictions can range from the respectful to the borderline racist caricature, though the latter is less prevalent now than it once was, as sensitivity to such matters increases. As emblematic to the Vietnamese and Southern Chinese as the beret is to the French, bowler to the English, or cowboy hat to the Americans, the conical hat, be it called the non la, du li, or any other name, will inevitably conjure up images of traditional Asia for generations to come. So I hope once again you found this video interesting and will join me again soon for another hat. Until then, I tip my hat to you.